Welcome to another edition of the Live from the Heartland show. This one is for April 13th, the week of, and we are recording it on the 8th. And we don't have a lot of time for my opening remarks because we have not only Thom Clark coming on to talk about a number of things, but we've got an interview that we did with the late, great John Sinclair, our pal who passed away on April 2nd. And we're going to run an interview we did with him in the second half of the show. One thing I would like to say is the NC2A women's events are over, basketball, and South Carolina won. Dawn Staley, their coach, made a wonderful statement at the end of the game where she talked about Caitlin Clark and the contribution she's made to basketball. With that said, her team from South Carolina, where the Civil War was started originally with a team of mostly black players and a black coach, really performed very well. And Staley said great things about Caitlin Clark and Caitlin Clark's contributions to the basketball world. Okay, with that said, a little music, and we'll be right back with Thom Clark. Okay, all you citizens of the world, it's time to bring on our first guest, someone who's well known to all of you regular listeners and viewers, the one and only Thom Clark, part of our advisory team. And every once in a while, we talk him into coming on and giving us a little bit of his take on all things Thom Clark, from local to global. And I think today we want to start off with that orange-headed guy that so many of us have not much respect for. Thom, what do you got to say about that guy?
I think he's losing it. His pronouncements get bolder and crazier by the day, it seems like, in between his trial appearances. We're going to see him in courtrooms a lot the next couple months. But whenever I hear the former president name-calling immigrants, he's, first of all, he reminds me of a schoolyard bully that never quite grew past 13 years of age, certainly not with his social etiquette. But I'm reminded of that scene in Dr. Strangelove, where one of the main characters talks about the need to maintain our precious bodily fluids from contamination from, I suppose in that context, it was communism. But here with this guy talking about immigrants poisoning our blood. And I have to think, what does that make his wife and his son with their poisoned blood that's, somehow affected our human genome? I mean, this guy is just really nuts. The Guardian had, I think, a great headline, as well as a lesson about how the media ought to be covering this guy, because he has wall-to-wall free coverage for all
Every
his
day.
emails. Every hour, there's something new that consumes our time and attention away from more important stuff, other than trying to avoid a fascist state coming in. But here's the headline from The Guardian. Trump's bizarre, vindictive incoherence has to be heard in full to be believed. Now, that, to me, is a potent headline that really covers the former president the way we ought to be covering him. They explain that excerpts do not do justice to the former president's smorgasbord of vendettas, non sequiturs, and comparisons to famous people. I mean, even Easter, he's making, in my mind, sacrilegious comments about the season that we're honoring. And I just think he's not doing anything to expand his base right now. He's just talking to the lemmings in his cadre. And I can't imagine that the stuff he's saying is adding a vote, if two, to his base. I think he's, he has more and more people turning independent who used to consider themselves Republicans. And he's having money problems. Those famous small donors just aren't cutting it the same way. I think a lot of people are concerned about their hard-won money going to pay for his legal bills, which are huge. So I think this guy may have peaked, and I don't see his base expanding. And I wish President Joe good health and get us through the next 9 months.
Every time I see him walking, I'm rooting for him because I know how it feels when you get a little bit older. Let's go in a little bit more into how he's being covered. I mean, everywhere you look, the first headlines are Trump this or that, something to do with one of the cases that have been brought against him. How do you think the media should handle it? And why do you think they don't do a better job?
Well, I think that with cuts in the media landscape, we have fewer seasoned reporters to actually give us some context and perspective. Number two, we are still way too much into a horse race frame where we look at polling, which this far out, Don Rose, amongst others, will tell you they're meaningless. And national polls are particularly meaningless when this will be a state by state swing state election. So the only polls that make any sense would be ones that look at key swing states. And it's too far away from the summer doldrums and the August conventions, much less Labor Day. Most voters are not paying attention until after Labor Day. And even then, they're trying to make a paycheck and pay the bills more than they are paying attention to this really crazy challenger to the sitting president. Um, every day he seems to be more unhinged. And the attacks on the judges in some of his cases, the judge's family in some of his cases, would have most of us in contempt of court and in a jail cell. I can't believe how privileged a life this victimized former president feels he has to, go through every day. It's bizarre, just bizarre and dangerous. And I think that the media needs to be a lot clearer about the dangers we really face as a democracy, and not just wait for Uncle Joe to come up with his latest speech about saving democracy. That's one thing, but I think we need, quite frankly, longer excerpts of this guy's daily quotes, because they disqualify him every day, in my book, from ever holding office of any kind. I mean,
Well,
even the dog should be afraid if he gets elected dog catcher.
there's a lot of kind of talk about how the media handles it. And I'm just wondering if the media ever talks to each other about it. I listen to the, WBEZ, and they have some really good discussions about the media. But I'm just wondering what the national media, why they don't get it better. Um, Anyhow, you did mention the Democratic convention. Um, and You said something about the Democratic convention or referred to it, and it's a big thing coming up here in Chicago. Back in 1968, a number of us attended the proceedings, so to speak. And I actually was photographed trying to tip over a paddy wagon, which got me a lot of mileage. But I was part of probably a group of many people who helped turn the election in Nixon's favor. And as an old radical who's trying to cool it out with some of the younger people saying things that I agree with, but know that it has ramifications for the coming election, it's challenging. Any thoughts on that? On the Democratic convention, how it's handled before, what's coming up, what's in store for us, and what are the ramifications?
Well, it so happens this morning, an op-ed broke in the Tribune that my dear colleague Stephen Franklin, who covered labor and the Middle East for the Tribune, and yours truly, penned a few weeks ago. Um, and our simple point was Chicago needs to come together and tell the real stories about our city with all its problems and challenges. Otherwise, all we're going to see is shoot 'em up stories, because that's kind of a main headline right now, is kids getting shot outside their school, which maybe we'll get to in a moment. But there are certainly other stories to talk about, including the violence prevention efforts that we've been unfolding in this city for some years now, and what's working and what's not working. There's one story for you. Um, 10 stories within 1 mile of the convention site. The United Center, the West Side, is a, uh, a series of neighborhoods that are brimming with activity, good and bad, but more and more for the good, that we rarely hear about. Um, the rich cultural. We are a foodie island now in the Midwest. People are more and more noting our very fine cuisine from all corners of the earth. Um, the cultural music and theater scene here is beat by no one else. We have a struggling, because of the pandemic still, but vibrant community theater scene. There are just a lot of stories we could be talking about, including some of the tougher ones, like how we're dealing with endemic poverty, how we're dealing with continuing patterns of segregation that hold so many people back. how indeed we're dealing with the migrant challenge that red states have thrown upon us by busing people up who are just looking for a better life. And indeed, we know from our own history, it is our continuing attraction to immigrants, migrants, and others looking for a better life that continue to enrich our country and our economy. We have the strongest economy of all the developed countries in the world right now, many of whom are still recovering from the pandemic. And of course, we're all dealing with the challenges that climate change are bringing to our economic comforts. So I think Chicago has an opportunity as the capital of the Midwest to really shine bright and talk about some of the real victories as well as works in progress that we have to celebrate in Chicago.
It's so that op-ed piece that you had in the was it in the Tribune?
In the Tribune, it would
And
be Monday this week that it appeared, and the op-eds are one thing you can usually get through the Tribune's firewall to get a chance to read, and if I dare say so, it's a pretty good piece.
have you gotten any good response on it? I
Well,
know it's just happening.
it's just happening, but already this morning, people are asking why we're not doing another convention project. Some folks might remember that in 1996, the Community Media Workshop, now known as Public Narrative, launched a major outreach to at least 800 of the 15,000 reporters that came to visit our town that summer. And we were able to infiltrate or source over 800 stories across the country that went beyond Chicago 68 and now. That was sort of the lead story that everybody had. We even had the best sources on that one, including the home phone number for the prosecutor of the Chicago 8. So it was a heady time in 96. We're not aware of a similar effort being launched right now, except we know there's a lot of interest in telling the rich plethora of stories there are to tell about Chicago. So I suspect we'll see Block Club Chicago and other nonprofit news outlets beginning to gather the troops and start helping inform the media community coming to visit us this summer what the real Chicago is all about.
You know, I did in 96, I did 32 interviews with newspaper reporters off of that picture of me from 68. And I don't know if I'll get any attention this time around or not, but um, certainly it's going to get a little challenging around the Democratic convention. I know that there are plenty of groups out there wanting to protest, and I'm not sure the city has been real good about how they handle it. And there's a lot of people saying that they're being kept away from getting too close, that kind of thing. That's sort of the thing that comes up every time we have a convention, but it's rearing its head now too.
And it came up ahead of the NATO conference that came after the 96 convention and was not that long ago, 2012. And I'm not sure what we learned from that. That most of the folks in charge back then are no longer with us. I'm thinking in particular of the head of the police at that point, who got a lot of marks for the way he controlled demonstrators trying to march to McCormick Place. Um, we know that there will be hot issues around reproductive rights, around Gaza, which I'm afraid won't be resolved by then. And those are issues that should be raised, and Biden should be held accountable for what's going on. But I also think, paying heed to your comment about 68, we don't want to project a Democratic Party that will turn off voters, but rather one that will turn against voters against the other guy. And I think that's probably one of the challenges both the Democrats and Biden face, as well as the mayor, in trying to project, put his best foot forward at a time of many, many different challenges.
You know, speaking of the mayor, one of the things that you like to talk about, and it is worthy of some talking, is the nasty car race downtown. Street blockades are announced. What do you got to say about the NASCAR race? And what do you got to say about the status of the mayor? There's a lot of discussion about where he's at and what we have hopes for and what we're not seeing and what we hope to see.
Well, I'll start with the race and we'll come to the mayor later. I call it the nasty car race because I can't believe that we give up our streets for upwards of 25 days from any kind of public access. Once again, there will not be softball in the softball fields of Grant Park this summer. And when you add in Lollapalooza and Taste of Chicago and Blues Fest and Gospel Fest and those other fests that we all enjoy and love, downtown will not be that open to the public again. Somewhere upwards of 65 days of street closings, 25 of those for the nasty car race, which, to be honest, didn't really return much on the investment. In other words, the cost of putting that event on. I suspect the newly elected mayor decided that that was one issue he didn't want to take on early on uh, in his administration, and went along with the contract that was already in place from Lori Lightsaber. Um, some people say that the background headline views of downtown Chicago was worth the price of admission, but I'm not really sure we got our money's worth given how little the public could access public land downtown. It goes back to before Lollapalooza, but I don't know where the idea of giving over public land to private interest for private profit happened. I know the city is always looking for new revenue, but to my mind, this is not the way to collect it. Uh, Similarly to our being asked as taxpayers to front for not one, but two new sports stadia, which are owned by gazillionaires that ought to build their own playground if they feel the need for a new one. Not one public dollar. I'm sorry. Every study shows that sports teams do not produce the economic payback that it costs us to keep them here. I'm not saying I don't love watching professional sports, but I think they should pay for their own playgrounds. I don't think we should be doing it. And I think the best advice I could give people is send extra contributions you might have available into Friends of the Park. They're going to have a doozy of a fight in their hands with this one. And if you have some extra change, one place that will be open late summer is that you can do a swim in the Chicago River. Are you all ready, Michael?
Well, I'm thinking
That's a
about it.
donation to Friends of the River because they have fought for decades to clean up the river, and they're now claiming it's clean enough to swim in it.
I
Can you
canoed the
imagine that?
river one time. I don't know about swimming in it. I do swim every day. I swam this morning, and now that you've raised it, I'm going to think about it. um,
Well, people have been kayaking in the river for some years now. I've done that on the North Branch. It's actually a thrilling way to see the city from one of its oldest transportation routes, namely the river. It's what really attracted people here to begin with because it offered a passage to the rest of the Midwest um, after you get over that portage out in the southwest side. But that's what the original people discovered when they came to the mouth of the Chicago River, and it became a regular hunting ground. It's what DuSable discovered when he decided to build a cabin at the mouth of the river. So I think the river is something to celebrate, and the fact that it's been that cleaned up, it's not pristine yet, but it's cleaned up enough that with a good wetsuit and maybe an extra layer of Vaseline, one ought to be able to survive in the river for a few minutes to get a swim in.
all right, Thom, you had one of our favorite people, Jan Schakowsky, who has been pretty good on the Middle East for a number of years now. She came over to your house. What's going on?
This is a tradition we've done for about a half dozen years now, interrupted by the pandemic. Our very active progressive parish, St. John the 23rd, has winter sign-up parties. It's an opportunity for parishioners to get to know each other better in informal settings, dinners and mini concerts and whatnot. And we've invited Jan Schakowsky now, who's also a good friend of our retired pastor, Father Bob Oldershaw. And she engaged about 24 of our fellow parishioners for about an hour and a half on a broad range of topics the other night. It was a very warm setting. She loves coming to these small settings. She right away started talking about Gaza because to her mind, it's one of the biggest challenges the sitting president is facing because of key voter blocks that he has not been very encouraging with because particularly if you look at Michigan, a key swing state, which has about 200,000 Arab American voters, they're not very happy with the current U.S. policy in the Middle East, particularly with the way the war in Gaza has been conducted. And as Jan said, it's overtime for a ceasefire. It's overtime for a massive humanitarian effort to offset what is clearly a series of human rights violations that, unfortunately, the current leadership of Israel has been committing for the last 6 months. So I think Gaza is a major challenge for the president. Uh, Veteran representatives like Jan Schakowsky can see that. Uh, Hopes that the situation improves over the rest of the spring and summer, but it's something that's going to be hard for Joe Biden to beat back the opposition he has from that for those series of actions he's made supporting Israel. It's
Yeah,
just in the last few weeks he's begun to more seriously question the ongoing war.
our guest last week, Paul Strauss from Dearborn, Michigan, right in the epicenter of the Palestinian population up there, he did talk about how activist a base it is, how it's an issue. But the question remains whether people given a choice of Trump or Biden will decide to keep would vote not vote in this case. We're going to have to see about that and keep talking it up.
Jan talked over and over again about how important it is to get every single vote out, particularly in those swing states. So while we might feel comfortable in the blue state of Illinois, she was really pleading for volunteers to also work in Wisconsin and Michigan, which one can do from one's home. It can be just phone work that one can do as a volunteer. But again, encouraging, I'm concerned about discouraged voters who won't bother to show up at all. I don't mind if the other side doesn't bother showing up because of the continued pronouncements of their leader. But I don't want any of our voters to not show up because of major disagreements over a singular policy issue when there's so much other good stuff that one can speak about regarding Joe Biden's accomplishments.
Tom Clark, in our remaining few minutes, why don't we talk about some people who have passed on? At the outset of the show, I mentioned that our pal John Sinclair, founder of the White Panther Party, had passed. And our second half of the show is going to be an interview that we did with him back in 2022. But there's not only John, but a couple of other people passed. Why don't you share that information?
Well, there was rather sudden news after the recent primary that the city clerk, Karen Yarborough, took ill this past week. And indeed, we are greeted with the news just this morning that she has passed away. Um, I'm sorry for her family and for this rather sudden turn of events, but I'll also use this occasion to point out that the city clerk position is one that should be appointed, not caught up in electoral politics. There's been lots of occasion for graft and patronage in that particular office for years. I don't put that just at the late Karen Yarborough's feet because it's been a tradition. And one reason why I think that should be really an appointed administrative position, not one caught up in our local machine politics.
What
Uh,
about our friend Lou Kreinberg?
Lou Kreinberg is a veteran organizer who worked with Dr. King when he came to Chicago in the 60s, did a lot of work on the West Side as well as in Pilsen through the auspices of the Jewish Council on Urban Affairs. He and the late Milt Cohen founded JCUA, which has played a critical behind the scenes role in many different social justice battles over the years. Uh, Lou and I worked particularly close together in fighting the proposed World's Fair in 1992. This was a 1980s fight where we beat Jane Byrne. Basically, her plans to do a World's Fair were found to be financially unfeasible. And uh, Speaker Madigan decided that he didn't want to put up public money, just as current political leaders should decide not to put up public money for these new stadia that are being bandied about. But the Lou will be honored in a celebration of life by his friends and colleagues on May 11th from 3 to 5 at Friendship Baptist Church, with whom he had a special relationship on West Jackson Boulevard in the Austin community. Um, we revere Lou's great work as an organizer and really hope that the next generation of organizers can learn from his dedication to digging out the data from public sources and then disclosing it to the public in a way they could understand it. and organize around.
Well, Thom Clark, thanks for coming on the show again. You know, you're always welcome, and I hope we get you back next month. We're going to take a short musical break. Here's some music from John Sinclair, who passed away on April 2nd. And then our second half of the show, once again, we're going to show an interview that we did with John. Thom Clark, great to see you. See
Best to you,
soon.
Michael, and all the life in the Heartland community.
Maybe later at the beach there watching the eclipse, because we are
There you go.
recording it on Monday the 8th. Everybody stay tuned here on the left end of your dial. We're going to be right back with more Live from the Heartland. Hi, all you citizens of the world. It's Michael James back with the second half of Live from the Heartland for the week of April 13th in the year 2024. And as I mentioned at the outset of our show, our friend, the jazz blues poet, performer John Sinclair passed away on April 2nd. We were really sorry to hear that. And we've decided for this second half of this week's show, we're going to rerun an interview that we did with John back on November 5th, 2022. He and I have been in contact recently. We were going to do more interviews, and we're so sorry to hear that he passed. He was a wonderful man, really set an example for a lot of us. I think Abe Peck, the editor of the great Chicago Seed in the old days, said he stayed the course, and he certainly did. I want to share a couple of things. I first met John in New York City. It was on the street. Here he was, a big guy, long black leather coat. At that time, he was the leader, the founder, the co-founder of the White Panther Party, and he was then the manager of the groundbreaking MC5, the Motor City 5, one hell of a great band. Over the years, our paths have crossed. We've shared some good times together. With my Rising Up Angry pals back in the old days, I attended two of the great Ann Arbor blues and jazz festivals that he produced in Ann Arbor. One was in Windsor, Ontario, actually, when the Republican-controlled then Ann Arbor City Council nixed the fest. I spent a really action-packed, jam-filled weekend with him in Detroit once, going from political rallies to musical events, including one with Mitch Ryder in Lincoln Park, Michigan, when John was managing him at the time. On another occasion, I went to Detroit because my son, Katie and Lake James, and the band Twin Peaks were kicking out the jams. And on numerous occasions, John came and played at one of the three stages that I had, whether the Heartland Cafe, the Red Line Tap, or the No Exit Cafe. There are a lot of good memories. I love you, John. We're going to share a little bit of your music, and then we're going to go to the interview that we conducted on November 5th, 2022. We miss you. We're thinking about you. You really set an example for all of us to keep the faith throughout till the very end. You were very critical of the system, particularly of Republicans, but also Democrats. Thank you for all you did. And I hope all of you enjoy this interview and spread it far and wide. Okay, we're back. We're back with more Live from the Heartland. I'm Michael James, and I'm here with my good friend John Sinclair, who I first met in New York City way back in the day.
Way back.
It was on the streets in New York City where I ran into you. You had a long black leather coat. You were running with the MC5 then, and it was just a short little exchange on the street. The last time I saw you was when I was in Detroit following Twin Peaks, one of my son's band, and you were there. We hung out. And in between, you did a lot of stuff. You went to New Orleans. You were at the Heartland, at the Red Line, at the No Exit. Those are no longer. Well, the No Exit's now called Le Piano. But anyhow, John, how are you? It's good to see you.
I'm better than usual.
That's good to hear.
I've had about 5 years of bad health. I'm just getting better now.
When we were setting this thing up, I noticed that you were riding a bicycle. You on that bike a lot?
No, I have an imaginary bicycle, just the pedals.
Just the pedals.
I do 1,500 repetitions every morning.
Oh, that's good. No wonder you're looking so good.
I'm 81 years old. How old are you?
I'll be 81 in January.
That's what I thought.
And you?
81 now on October 2nd.
You're my elder. I like that.
You don't have too many. We don't have too many elders anymore.
I know. It's
Remember when we used to worship our elders and look up to them? I heard you talking about Harold Washington. I felt the same way about Coleman A. Young in Detroit. He was our greatest mayor.
well, we like them both, and it won't be too long till we both meet them up in heaven.
And they were both Democrats to the bone.
And I'm trying to hang in till I hit 100. So let's you and I do that together.
Me too. Me too. I was going to say, last month I went to Lowell, Massachusetts for the Jack Kerouac 100th birthday celebration.
How was that?
It was fantastic. And I got to play with David Amram, who's 92.
Wow.
He was on the piano.
So Lowell, Massachusetts was the site of some great strikes in the old days.
True that.
The industrial workers of the world, I believe. Okay, John Sinclair, you were commenting on the mood of the country, a question I asked our first two guests. And what do you think the mood of the country is?
I think it's insanity. I think they're nuts. My heart goes out, as I say, to the poor white people of America. They got all the jobs, they got all the money. 1% of them own everything. And the other ones that don't have anything worship the 1%. They'll do anything for Donald Trump, who's one of the biggest geeks of all time in our country's history. You know, this all started with Ronald Reagan. Remember you were talking about the media?
Yeah.
Ronald Reagan, that punk? Well, he is the one who ended the ban on any one company owning more than 7 media outlets in the country. Remember that? Before Ronald Reagan, you could only own 7 in 7 different markets. You couldn't own 2 in the same market, TV or radio. Now they got places like these people that use my name, Sinclair Broadcasting. No relation.
Right on.
They are in communities where they own 18 radio stations. You can't get a word in other than theirs in the whole area. So that's what's wrong with this, because then these right wingers, who do you think owns these radio stations? Rich people, white people. And they're using them against everybody else. You know, where are all the jobs going? They got all the jobs. What are they talking about? They haven't got any security. They got more money than Croesus. You go to a football game and take their family, it costs them $300.
Yeah. Yeah, they're pretty white.
Plenty money.
You know, when I talk to
They don't want black people or Hispanic people to get any money. That's what they want.
John, when I talk to people, a lot of times I say, someday I hope that the white people in this country will be viewed as a minority that works for the good of the whole, and that the United States is viewed in the world community as a country that works for the good of the whole. Now, that's a long way off. That's a long way off.
Good luck on that one. I can agree with the first part about white people becoming a minority. That's what they're afraid of.
No, they are.
These people up for so many centuries. The black people, they brought in here since the 1600s. They owned them for 300 years. Now they don't even want to give them jobs or they don't want to give them anything. These white people, they don't want to give the colored people anything at all. I hate it here.
Well, you talked about radio stations, and you did mention that you have a station of your own, even though you're not like a Sinclair broadcasting system.
Oh, no, I got my own, Radio Free Amsterdam.org. I'm online.
Tell us a little bit about that, because we got the Live from the Heartland show on youtube.com/heartlandmedia/videos.
Yeah, I love this. I follow you. I get your announcements every week.
I send them out regularly.
I like it. You do a hell of a job. And I enjoy this because you and I, personally, as white people, have opposed racism for about 60 years.
Yeah, we have.
I know I have. I hate it. And I hate what they're doing to this country now, and I'm on pins and needles about this election because the media has got everything set up for the Republicans. In Michigan, they're running a bunch of maniacs. They're running a bunch of people that should be in a sane asylum for governor, lieutenant governor, secretary of state, attorney general. They should all be in prison. They shouldn't be running for. They're awful. And yet these white people endorse all this. I don't get it. What's wrong with them? Are they that totally brainwashed by Fox News? I guess so. I don't understand it.
Well, it's hard to grasp because I watch, I watch CNN, MSNBC. I go online. I get a lot of news, but I do just feel it's always slanted in favor of Republicans,
Well, they
creating
own
fear
everything.
among us. Yeah, they
They
do.
own every television station. Is there a left-wing television station in the U.S.?
No, the only thing I
Is
see
there a
once in a
left-wing
while,
radio station?
there's a free speech radio or free speech TV, which is really lame.
That probably means you can say how great Trump is and make America great. Make America great again. America's never been great.
Good. Good point.
They stole this country from the people who lived here. They killed them all. They killed all their food, so they couldn't survive. Then they brought the black people to do all their work, and now they're complaining because they all want something. Like them, they want to have what they have. They don't want this.
Well, John Sinclair, I'm in agreement with you on all of that, but I want to ask you about how you've been doing. You fill all of our listeners in, because a lot of people know about you from your early days when you were running with the MC5, when you were starting the White Panther Party, and then you put on those great events, the Ann Arbor Blues and Jazz Festivals. Yes. For many years, you came to the Heartland and performed. Then you went to New Orleans for a while. And tell us about New Orleans. Then you went to Amsterdam. Now you're back in Detroit. What's been happening in your life over that 20 years?
There it is in a nutshell. I was in New Orleans for 12 years. I had the best time of my life. I was on the radio there, WWOZ, the best radio station in the world. And I was voted the most popular disc jockey in New Orleans for 5 years. I don't usually blow my own horn, but I'm very proud of that.
No, you should be proud of that. And you can blow your own horn on my show.
And when I moved there, my kids and all, I brought up 4 girls. And 2 of mine and 2 of my second wives. And when they all got through school, me and my wife moved to New Orleans. We thought, this is our chance. We're free. We can do whatever we want. And I decided at that point, 1991, I was 50 years old. I decided to pursue my chosen area as a poet, a writer, and a disc jockey, and a performer. And so since 91, that's what I've been doing. I wouldn't take any other jobs. And since 2006, when I made 65, I get a stipend from the government every month called SSI, and they pay all my medical bills. So, and I have to live in Detroit because I'm near the Detroit Medical Center. So I lived in Amsterdam for 15 years, half a year. You can only stay 3 months at a time without a visa. So I went back and forth. Now you could go to England, even before Brexit. England wouldn't be part of the EU thing. So 15 years I spent doing that.
And you won the Cannabis Cup over there. What was that all about?
Well, I was brought there initially in 1998 as the high priest of the Cannabis Cup. Cannabis Cup was a promotion put on every year, started by a guy named Ed Rosenthal from California.
Oh, yeah, I remember Ed.
You know Ed, hero of marijuana. And then taken over by High Times magazine. And now, then High Times ran it into the ground, and Amsterdam pretty much threw them out. They raided their last one, the High Times said. They raided it with 1,500 police because they were ignoring, Amsterdam's an easy place to get along in, but you got to have good manners, You can't be an American thug, and a money. So they put them out. Now they have an impromptu gathering every November. See, it's a thing. It's big for the marijuana business community because they say which is the best weed. And when a thing wins, then the next year, all the goofy white people, consumers, they all buy that particular brand. So that's why it was so important.
Yeah. Well, you came back to Detroit now. Part of that's medical, but you also, did I see something about you started a new business, like a coffee house or a marijuana store?
I tried to open a coffee shop and it didn't work out. But I'm fixing to open a coffee shop again the first of the year in the north end of Detroit.
Well,
Because they don't have any place here for people like us to go to.
well,
They
I've
only
been.
got, they only got coffee houses for squares.
I'm really
You
aware
know?
of the situation because we sold the Heartland and they ran it for another 9 years, but it's a real gap or a hole in the neighborhood. It used to be one reason
Closed?
we set up the Heartland to it's been closed since 2019,
Oh dear.
and it was
Love the Heartland Cafe.
it was a great place. A lot of
Hey,
people crossed over, people met each other. It was a place people could go, develop ideas, eat good food. We need places like that. So
community center.
you young people got to open some hip places for everyone to hang out. Us old guys, we'll
They
hang
don't
out.
know what's hip though. You got to tell them. They don't know who Miles Davis was. They call themselves hipsters. They don't know who John Coltrane was. There was no hip without Miles Davis, man, period. He invented hipness.
Hey, for the younger people who don't know, you got busted with 3 joints
Two
way
joints.
back. Two
Two
joints.
joints that I gave to an undercover police woman.
And that ended up landing you in jail for 3 years.
Yeah.
And then there was an effort at one point from John Lennon and Yoko. There's a movie, but it didn't get shown a lot. Can you shed any light on all that events and what happened?
Well, after I was in prison for 2.5 years, we had a huge rally in Ann Arbor at the Chrysler Arena on December 10th of 1971. 15,000 people came to demand my freedom. It was headlined by John and Yoko. Stevie Wonder played, Phil Oakes, Archie Shepp, Allen Ginsberg, Phil Oakes. Did I say him?
You did. One of our favorite. I hung out with him one time. That was
Yeah,
good.
great guy. Anyway, they got me out of prison. 3 days later, I got out.
That's really good.
Then we overturned the Michigan marijuana laws.
That's good to hear. So we got a couple of minutes left, I think. What's on your mind most besides the election? What are you talking about opening another coffee house?
That doesn't take much thought. I thought all the things about that out quite a few years ago. It's just finding a place to do it, without any money. That's my main thing, is doing things without any money. I've done it all my life. And at 81, I'm still trying to do it. So it seems to work for me. Unlike most white people, they want to have a lot of money. I don't want to have any money.
Well, I think it's time for me to come up and have a little visit with you. We ought to hang out together again.
That would be great. We had a great time the last time.
We did have a good time last time. Well, you've always been one of my heroes. I loved your books, your music, your poetry. One of the things that was really great in my life was going as your guest with a bunch of Rising Up Angry members to the Ann Arbor Blues and Jazz Festival.
Yes.
And I do have some footage of
points in my career.
that was one of the greatest events ever
of all time.
Yeah, do you think they'll ever have another Ann Arbor Blues and Jazz Festival?
Well, they have them, but they don't know how to get people to come. Our secret was to promote it like a rock show. We promoted to rock and roll. Blues lovers and jazz lovers were a very small minority of music lovers at that time. But I managed the MC5 and we were involved in the rock and roll field. We know how to promote So we promoted the Ann Arbor Blues and Jazz Festival like it was a Fleetwood Mac show. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So thousands of people came and they loved it. They never heard any of the artists before. They came because it said we were going to have a real good time.
I did have a real good time, and I confess to being in an altered state a lot of the time.
That was part of it.
It was really good. Well, John, if you got anything else you'd like to add as we close out this edition of the Live from the Heartland show, now is your opportunity.
No, that's okay. I could talk forever, as you could tell. But it's nice seeing you, man. It's a thrill being on your show. I read about it every week in my email box.
Well, I'll send you the link.
Now I'm there. Now I'm going to appear in the next mailings.
And it won't be the last time, because you and I are making a vow to live to be around 100 years old.
I'm available anytime you want me.
We only got 19 years to go, and we'll be back in touch.
Amen.
All right. Power to the people. Well, that was our interview with John Sinclair, the last one we did. We had been in correspondence about him doing some more interviews, a lot of history there. You can find out a lot about John if you go Google his name. You can listen to some of the most wonderful music, and there's actually history lessons embedded in all that he did. I do want to thank him and once again say we miss you, John. You did great in the world. You did good in the world. Power to the people is where it's at, and we're all working to make that a reality still. I want to thank our engineer, Hal James. I want to thank our co-producers, Katie Hogan, Thom Clark, and Lynn Orman. And I'm Michael James, and I'll be back with another show next week. Please spread this show far and wide. Let John's words speak for themselves, because what he said in this interview back in 2022 is still relevant today, more so. Thank you.